Hello there everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to make this fire and ice wirework bracelet, and this is what mine looks like here. So you can kind of see the effect of the ice is this here in the middle, the zigzag with the blue beads, or the dark purple rather. That's obviously just what I've chosen to use, but then they're kind of separated out by these flames coming out from the sides. Now that's just what it made me think of, that's why I called it that. But obviously different materials will make it look very different, but then it looks like this here. And then on, it can look a little something like this. So you can see you get that really nice effect going all the way around with the zigzag, and then the wire weave coming from the sides in towards it. So I'd love to hear what you think of this in the comments down below. But if you want to learn how to make it, then stay tuned. So it's these materials here that we're going to need. First of all, here I have my wire. So I have two different gauges of regular round copper wire. The first one here is a 1mm thickness. So this is the base wire and the strength of the piece. And then here I have a 0.4mm. This is going to be the weaving wire. And then the beads that I'm using here are these 8 Miyuki seed beads. The specific colour is silver lined dark violet. And we have these ribbon ends to finish off the ends with. And then of course our findings, so extended chain, locked or claw clasp, and then the jump rings to attach it all together. So let's get our materials ready and let's get started. So then first of all here we'll need some lengths of our wires, and what I have is 6 lengths of my 1mm gauge of about 35 centimeters each, and these are going to be the base wires. And then we're also going to need 2 lengths of the 0.4mm wire of about 2.5 meters each, and these are going to be the weaving wires around the base wires, so they're going to get used up quite a bit. So then the first thing we're going to do is just prepare some of our base wires a little bit. So just on 2 of them here, what we're going to do is attach, or rather wrap some of the weaving wire around, but it's just a temporary thing that we're going to be doing to help us with the spacing throughout. So just on one at a time, I've just cut off a short length of about maybe 15 centimeters or so of the weaving wire, and all you're going to do is just coil this around the base wire nice and tight, because it's just going to act, like I said, to account for the spacing that we want in the weave. But it's easier just kind of attaching this beforehand, because then what we can do as well, obviously we're going to be removing it at the end, but what we can do as we go, we're going to use this closer where we're weaving, but we can push this up and down the wire, so use this along the way. So just do this with both of them, just a little section of about 1 centimeter or so is plenty, with 2 of the base wires. So I now attached it on both of them here, and it looks like that. You can see we can easily move this up and down. So this is going to be really helpful. So I then want to take one of these base wires with that coil on, we'll attach that. And I want to then attach my actual weaving wire, one of the lengths, onto this as well. So what I just want to mention is these 2 lengths of base wire, where we attach the coil, are both going to be the outer wires, so on either side, or rather top and bottom, how you look at it. But to attach this then, we're basically just going to do the exact same thing. So work towards one end, and also leave a short tail to hold on to, and then just start coiling this around this base wire by itself for a few wraps. So to then get into the actual weave, I'm going to continue adding in base wires, but what I kind of want to do is just set up the main base wires I'm going to be using first of all. So we're not using all of them straight away, we're just starting out with some of them. But again, what I actually want to do is add my bead onto one of them here, and I kind of want to get these wires ready in position first of all. And what I'm then going to be doing is using these beads also for spacing, because what we want to make sure to do is not make this weave too tight. So I'm just adding one bead onto one length, then placing another length next to it, adding another bead onto it, just pushing it down, because obviously the reason we don't want the weave too tight is we need to make sure we have space for these beads. Whereas if we don't then take that into account as we're starting the weave out, we're going to not have space to then add them in. So therefore I'm using the actual beads I'm using in the piece to also make sure I leave space so they're going to fit. And then also on the third one there. So they're sitting just like that next to each other. I'm just going to add in the first length that we already prepared, just like this here, because you can see by adding those beads like that we have more space in between the wire than if they were sitting right close to each other and we were just using the weaving wire for the spacing. So that's why I'm also just using these beads here, and obviously we can continue adding them throughout, But then what I actually want to do is, what I find kind of easiest for this is then adding these wires into a clamp, especially right at the beginning here. So I'm just taking my spring clamp and then I'm making sure it's all sitting how I want it to, and then I put this on to the base wires. So basically the clamp now is going to hold the base wires in the position that I want them, and it's also going to help not cramping our hand holding on to it, but it's going to make it just more likely that we're going to be able to keep the spacing. And obviously this you can move up and down, all the way down to there if you need to, and the beads go up and down as well. And it's on this bottom one where we have the weaving wire that we also have that initial coil that we made. So we're going to need to start bringing that down as well, so it's handy. And this is now the setup, and we're ready to start out the first part of the weave. And then to help even more with the weave, and also what I'm going to be doing along the way, is adding some more beads in here and there as I'm making the weave. Because I have these first ones, they're going to account for the spacing right at the beginning here. But obviously if we didn't think any more about it, so add in beads to help with that, once we start weaving, what you'll probably find is when we bring this around the wires, it will start pulling the base wires together, because obviously there's open space between them. So to help avoid that, that's why I'm going to be using the beads along the way, and also this coil, to make sure we don't get the wires, base wires, pulled close together, because that's then the situation where we're not going to be able to fit in the beads. So what we're going to do to start the weave, I've got my bead handy and I've got that coil handy. I'm going to bring the weaving wire over the top of them, and then I need to go down between the middle of them to wrap over the top of the bottom two. So I'm just bringing it down there and then pushing that all the way down, and you can kind of already get the feeling, if I just leave it as it is, if I didn't have the bead, it would start pulling the two longer lengths of it there together. You can kind of see it there. So to avoid that, I'm going to make sure I push that bead down, not all the way. You can also hold it on the back there with your finger to kind of brace it. And also what helps is to not pull too tight on your weaving wire. Just kind of lay it across and then bring it around whenever you need to. So it's coming around the top of those two base wires, then it's coming down towards the back, then you come up between those two base wires that we just went across the top of, and then bring the weaving wire all the way down. Now obviously the bead right now is kind of in the way, but just gently move it out of the way and bring the weaving wire all the way down to where we're weaving, and then push that close. Then I'm going to wrap around that second one, that one there by itself, so that means we need to go down in the same place, right in the middle. And you can see that bead does want to move around, and that's why it can be a little fiddly doing this, having kind of the loose beads in there and the coil and everything, but I personally feel like it's important enough and a good way, the best way really, to find that you get the best spacing and the most even final look to it. So that's the initial wraps. Then we need to go again around the bottom, over the top of the wires, and now moving across the top of the three bottom wires there. So that means going down between the top two and push that down. And what you can always do is, because we can't really pull too tight on this weaving wire, squeeze it down there on top of the weaves or the wraps with your thumb or your finger or something to help get it a bit closer to the base wires, like that. And then also what I actually want to do is add another bead on the next wire up, because again obviously otherwise they might start to pull together, because that third one up there doesn't have one. But then we need to come up between the middle ones, and then you just basically need to bring your wire in between these beads. So just make a little bit of space for them, and then push that all the way down, wrap around that same base wire by itself, so down between the top two again, and again push it down. What you can also do is use some chain nose pliers to push your wraps together if you need to, especially those single wraps. I want them close to the wraps across more of the wires, and then down behind all of them, and then over the top again of all of them now. So we need to get all the way to the top one. Bring it around the back. So this is now basically the midpoint of this section. And what I just want to do also is add a bead to that. Because now we need to, because it's a midpoint, we need to move back down again. We're kind of graduated upwards towards that midpoint, and now we need to come back down to the bottom base wire. So I'm coming up then between the two middle ones and go in between these beads. And it's always the very beginning part is the most fiddly. It gets a little bit easier, and obviously also when we get the hang of it further on. But then wrap around that single wire, the third one. So go down between the top two. Push it all the way down. And then come all the way down to the bottom one. And make sure as well, by the way, these beads are sitting basically on top of that coil. And then go over the top of the bottom three. Go between the beads again. Press it flat with your thumb. And then for the next one we need to come up between the bottom two. So bring the weaving wire up there. Push it all the way down. And then just wrap around that second one from the bottom. So that one right there. By itself, so that means go down in the middle of all of it. And come between your beads. Like that. And just make sure to push your wraps tight. And then again, down behind all of them, around the bottom. And then over the top of those two bottom base wires. So what you can see, we're kind of replicating the beginning. We're just moving in a mirrored image to complete this little section. Again, down in the middle. So between those middle two. And it doesn't really matter if these beads switch position or anything. You can always fix that. The most important thing is to use them for the spacing right now. And then come down behind to then wrap around the bottom one by itself. And then push that all the way down. And we can kind of maybe just get these a little bit out of the way now. And then what we want to do is just wrap around the bottom base wire by itself now. Because this is now one whole little section complete. So you can kind of call these little sections the little flames or whatever you want to call them. We're going to be making these multiples along the way and swapping from side to side as well. Then all you want to do now is coil along this bottom base wire for a bit. Because what we then need to do is swap to working on the opposite side, where we can also then add in the last base wires that we have. So then to start on that other side, we need to get the other base wire out where I attached that coil. Because like I said, that's going to be the other outer one. And then also the other length of the weaving wire. So first of all, we just want to attach the weaving wire to this. And what we need to do is actually do this in the opposite direction. So before I put my weaving wire behind, now I'm going to put it in front and then just start coiling around. And that automatically just puts it in the opposite direction. And again, you just want to coil this around a few times so we have a decent length here. And then it's nice and fast, and then we can get into the proper pattern. So now that it's attached, we need to obviously also bring in the very last weaving wire. So what I'm going to do is place this below the one that we just wrapped onto. Just like this. And then what I want to do is add a bead first of all to that new one. Again, to use for spacing, but also to make sure we have the right beads in the pattern along the way. So add that bead to sit underneath the coils there. And then what I want to do is start to bring this around the top a bit. So it's coming from below and then coming around the top of the base wire. Then I'm going to bring it towards the bottom there. And obviously we then need to get into the actual weave. But what I also just want to do is add another bead just on the other side here for the spacing again. And I'm just bringing down the coil on that one as well. Just bring it nice and close So this one stays on this side, and then this one up here is just kind of again for spacing along the way. And it's just to make sure that on neither side of this wrap that we're pulling it too tight. So then bring it around the top and then towards the bottom again. And then when you come up between the two, and go past that bead, and put it back in place if you need to. Just jumping away. So that single wrap now around that bottom base wire. And then go back behind both of them up to the top again. You see we have a bit of space there, otherwise you can always move the coil up a bit. And then come down over the top of them again. But now what we don't have is any more base wires to add in because we used them all. But what we then need to do is actually connect these two together, because obviously it's going to be one piece, and one side of the weaves there is going to go towards the middle and the other side is going to go towards that as well. So we need to connect these two parts before we move on. And what you can do, you can always just take it out of the clamp first of all. Obviously be careful we don't lose any of the beads, that they fall off. And then just place this on the top side of these here that we already did. And then what we can see is I'm adding that first bead that we added into that new base wire is now going to be the tip of that kind of bottom pattern there. And then just want to get my base wires in position, because don't worry too much about how this is sitting, because we can always move things up and down the base wires. It's just more that the spacing is going to be right. So try and hold it together and then put the clamp back on. So just like that. Let's get a little tail out of the way. And now we have it back in, so we can start working even more now on this top side. Just separate my base wires out a little bit, the long ends there. You can always do that to make it easier to go in between as well. So there, we're in place now. And then what we need to do is obviously continue, because what we need is the same that we did down here. The first little section we did, I'm just going to bring this down a little bit. We need that on the opposite side here as well. So for that reason, we've already started it. So we're going to continue now with moving. Just going to make sure everything's in place. Like I said, the beginning can always be the most fiddly part. I think I need to push that down a little bit. So we still have that bead on the outside there kind of by itself that we need to use for the spacing. So just leave that there for now and push this coil down a little bit. Because then to continue, we need to come over the top of the top three base wires, where the bottom one out of them is the top one in this bottom section that we just kind of added in, that was already in the clamp. And that's how we then connect all of the base wires together. So come down there and push your weaving wire all the way down, and making sure we're not pulling anything too tight. But again, that's why the beads are there anyway. And they come up between that second and third wire from the top. So between the wires, the same wire and the wire just below that one with the bead on. So we just wrap around this one by itself, push it down, and come down in the same place. So this is right in the middle of everything. You can see right there. And again, push that all the way down. So we have that single wrap now. You can use your fingers and nails if you need to make sure your wraps are nice and tight together to each other. So right next to each other there. Then all the way down behind all of them, or up behind rather, and come over the top to then make that midpoint. So this is kind of the longest wrap across, which is also the one we have in that first section. And that means we just step another wire down. So this now comes down between the second and third wire from the bottom. And then just push that in. And before we do that, again, I'm just going to add in another bead, because you can see here these are wanting to pull a little bit close to each other. So I'm just going to pick out the next wire down from where the last one we added a bead to and add that right there. Just make sure to get that bead up. And I'm also, while I'm at it, going to add a bead to the very next one. And like I said, we're using these for spacing, so we're kind of doing this along the way. Doesn't really matter how they're placed, but also we're going to leave them in there when we keep moving on, because we always need the beads in between the weaves along the way. So we're going to add them anyway. We're just then, to begin with here, using them for the spacing. So something a bit like that. Make sure you have that coil as well. Then come around the back again, and then we need to come up between number 2 and 3 from the top, and then go, just bring your weaving wire between the beads here, kind of zigzag between them, and just pull your bead out a bit if you need to. And then we need to do the single wrap, so move down one wire. So this is down right in the middle of everything. Pull the bead out a bit to then do that single wrap right on the other side of the midpoint. Then come down behind or up behind all of them. And I can see I just need to move that coil a little bit so I get more of the bare base wire showing. You can see that there. Come up and then down behind, right in the middle of everything, to come behind the base wires again. The same place that we just came down before. Just get the beads a bit out of the way. Push that all the way down there. Again, you can always push this flat with your fingers along the way to get that correct shape in place. And then step down for the second base wire from the top. So come up between the top two, just like that. Bring the weaving wire all the way down to then wrap around that second one from the top. So that means going down between the second and third one from the top. Push it all the way to come behind them up towards the top, and then do a wrap over the top of the two top base wires. So that means we're going down in that same place and bringing the weaving wire all the way down and push it close, just like that. Again, we're always making sure that we have the coil and all the beads so we get the right spacing. And then the final thing in this section here is to go down, or up rather, keep forgetting the direction, to just wrap around the single wire on the top, so coil around that by itself. So you just come down between the top two to be able to do that. So this is exactly the same that we did down here, because basically what that is moving across from one section to be able to get to the next one. So you now just want to keep coiling around this base wire by itself as well. So then to make the next section here, that's on the bottom side, because obviously we started there, then we did the one on the opposite side, so we want to keep swapping from side to side. And I have my beads in place for now that I've added so far. So now we just want to start down here, and what we just want to make sure to do is that we have the right amount of wraps in between the sections. So depending if you use different materials, that might be different to you, but in my case here I'm adding 16 wraps. So I'm counting that 16 times from the first section there, and then until now when I start the second one. And that's going to be the same between each wrap on both sides there. It's just so I know that they're going to stay even throughout, and it fits nicely with going in the middle of these beaded sections as well. So then to start the next section is basically the same that I've already showed you down here. I want to first just add in my bead on this second from the bottom, and also just have my coil handy. And then you want to just start taking your weaving wire on the bottom side here, go across the top of the bottom two base wires, and then push that down to then come up between them, so we can do the single wrap and down between the same place as the first one, like that. And I'm just going to make sure I have that coil and that bead in place, so as I'm tightening this, it's not going to pull the two base wires too close together. And obviously these beads, still be careful because they could fall off if you kind of tilt it the wrong way. But just make sure to push them down as well. Along the way when you're making it, make sure to push the beads and the weaves nice and close together so it all stays in the shape that we want it to. But then you just want to keep making this section again. So the exact same thing that I already showed you. But remember to add your beads along the way to help with the spacing. But then complete this section, then move to the other side, count the same wraps, and you just basically complete this from side to side all the way along till you have the length that you need. So this is then what it looks like once I continued. You can see we end up with this kind of zigzag in the middle with the beads, and then that wire weave on either edge. That kind of frames it in nicely. So what we need to do now is get rid of this excess weaving wire. So what I've just done is continued weaving around the outside ones until they come about a level or just a bit above that last bead there. So to get rid of them, what I'm going to do is, they've already been wrapped around that single base wire several times. So all I'm going to do is take my flush cutters and then cut them off kind of towards the inside in between the base wires there, as close as I can. And then I'm going to take my chain nose pliers, and we then just need to make sure that we squeeze in the very little end that's sticking out so we can't feel it on our skin or anything. Just press that away. Do the same thing with the one on the other side. And then what we need to do is cut down the excess of the length of the base wires. First of all, we can just take these coils off if you want to. You can also just leave them on, it doesn't really matter, but they're quite easy just to take off like this. And then to get rid of these here, we also obviously need to finish off the end also so the beads don't fall off. So the very last ones there. So what I'm going to do is use this ribbon end to do that, and it's going to sit right there after the beads basically and help hold it all in place and give it a nice finish so we can attach our finding to that. So what we need to do is kind of, I like to lay it a little bit on top of or next to get a sense of the depth of the ribbon end, because we need to cut off these wires in the right length. So lay it there where it's going to sit. I'm going to attach it, and then we need to cut off the 4 middle lengths of wire, not the 2 outer ones there, and then just choose the right place. So somewhere a little bit further up, be roughly about there, so it's going to fit nicely inside, plus a bit of extra space, like that. And then I'm going to cut them off. Like I said, those 4 middle ones, the same length as each other. Just taking one at a time, so we make sure to avoid cutting off the outer ones. So there we go. And then for the outer ones, I'm going to get my chain nose pliers, and then we need to make a bend, a corner there on either side, and cross in over towards each other. So to do that, I'm going to place my pliers just a bit above where I cut off the other ones, and then I'm just going to bend it inwards. So this outer wire now basically lays across the end of those wires that we cut off. I'm just going to flip it over and do the same with the other one. So first of all, they're just going to be crossing on top of each other, these two. And this is just to kind of finish it off nicely, but it's also going to help with the ribbon end itself. So just something a bit like that. And there we go. And then we need to cut off the excess with these, but what I'm then going to do is one at a time, I'm going to cut them off in the middle. So I just take the back one first of all. I'm going to cut it just almost right in the middle. Get the bead out of the way. And there we go. And then the other one I'm going to cut. So once they're both cut, the ends are basically going to almost pretty much meet up with each other like that. And be right against each other. So just like that. You can see they just sit nicely and perfectly, kind of caging in almost the ends of the other wires there. And then now I'm going to actually use the ribbon end to finish off the end. So for this, I'm also going to be using some glue. So I'm using this E6000 because it's going to help add extra security to the piece and longevity. And just put a little bit on a toothpick here, just to help apply it with. And then what we need to do is get this inside of the ribbon end. So just like this here, just get it inside, kind of up and down the sides of it. Now we don't need to add too much glue because this is going to come spilling out, but just a nice coating there on the inside. And then I like to do with whatever I have left on the toothpick really. Just get that out. I like to go over the edge of the actual bracelet and get it in between the wires, basically kind of between the nooks and crannies, because then when we bond the two together, that's going to really help make it nice and strong and secure. So just get it in there, and then we just put the ribbon in here over the end of the wires, and you can see it's going to fit just perfectly. I'm going to take my flat nose pliers, and then we need to start pressing this down. So I don't like to go in one place and just make a big squeeze. I like to kind of start on one side or the middle and gently start pressing it down a bit at a time and work from side to side until I'm almost all the way down. And then I want to make sure I check it to see if it's still in the middle, and then we can start squeezing it more tight when we're happy with how it sits. You just want to keep squeezing this until it's nice and tight, and also just make sure to squeeze the ends down there so they're not too open. So like that, and then obviously you just want to let the glue dry as well before we can then finish off the other end the same way once you have the length for the exact length that you want your bracelet to be. Mine is a clasp obviously, but we can then use these loops in the ribbon ends to add a clasp with as well. So the only thing left to do now that I've finished off both ends there, and the ends and the clasps are ready, is to obviously shape the bracelet so we can actually wear it. Now you can either shape it and push it around something that has the size and shape you want it to have, or you can just use your hands and fingers. So what I like to do is just go in, start from the middle or so, and then just gently start putting in a curve into the bracelet, but don't go into one place and like make a big bend because that'll make it out of shape. Just gently gradually get more and more of a curve, and then obviously with the right side facing outward. Remember that, because there's a front and a back to this. They are slightly different. But then what we need to do is get the ends here, so the two parts of the clasp, closer towards each other, and you basically keep going like this until they meet up so we can then use it as a bracelet. So now that the bracelet is fully shaped and I can use the clasp, then it looks like this here. Now obviously this is just the materials that I've used, so you get that pop of colour in the middle from the beads that give that really nice zigzag effect. And then obviously the wire weave there on either side, there's kind of flame or fire and ice look. That's obviously partly because of the colours that I chose to use. You can choose whatever you want to, but then that's what it looks like. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you very much for watching.